Yeah, welcome in, welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Yes. So, you probably noticed that this looks a little bit different, but what I'm doing here is, with Anthony Edwards' recent comments regarding the past errors and not having skill, and a lot of the past players really taking him to task on that, and a lot of content creators discussing that, myself included. What I wanted to do was, it really got me thinking, and obviously I touched on this comment, and I touched on that comment, I should say. I produce shows about it, and also as well other of the all-time greats talking about it. So we did that. But what it made me do was just go back again, look at the guys from the past, and really just kind of give them their props, give them their credit, give them their kudos, throw them their flowers, etc. Because obviously, I'm a little bit older, kind of middle-aged guy, so I've seen what 4 different decades of NBA basketball now, right? I've been seeing NBA basketball since the '80s, so I kind of have a pretty good point of reference in terms of comparing eras. And it made me think about my all-time favorite player, and that's Hakeem Olajuwon. And so I went back through the archives of my show, and you can do that too if you enjoy the show. There's a lot of good content on there, and I figured it would be time to kind of do a re-release from a couple years ago. And this was right after Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors won the championship, I want to say in 2022. And the talk was more about, where does Steph Curry go in terms of the all-time rankings. And it made me go back and really, do a dive into Hakeem Olajuwon and his level of greatness, and why he's, in my opinion, so criminally underrated and disrespected by many. Now, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to replay that show for you so you guys can see that, and hopefully you can enjoy it. Hopefully, you can learn something about Dream. Maybe go back, watch more film on him. Really look at what he did and what he was able to do over an all-time incredible career, which I'm going to talk about in that episode that you're going to see very shortly here. But one thing I did want to do, I wanted to make sure that I did this, was to there was a point in the show where I believe I stated that Hakeem Olajuwon's the only player in NBA history to lead his team in all major statistical categories through an entire playoff run, resulting in a championship. Now, when I said that, that was true. But since then, in the past 2 years, that has changed. Nikola Jokic, I'm sorry, did that in 2023 when Denver won their championship. So he was only the second guy in history to do that. So I wanted to make sure I acknowledged the Joker, Nikola Jokic, as the second player ever to lead his team in every major statistical category on a playoff run resulting in a championship. But when I made this episode originally, Dream at that point was the only guy to do it. And still, I will take Dream to this day over Jokic any day of the week. And that's not necessarily because he's my favorite player. Yeah, that helps. But we also, and this is not taking a shot at Jokic, but there's no way you can tell me that you take a guy who only plays one side of the ball over, maybe a top two or three uh, all-time two-way player in the history of the game, and Hakeem Olajuwon. But as you watch the show, you will see more about Dream, and why I believe he's so criminally underrated, and all the amazing things he did. But before we get to that, you know what time it is. If you're here on YouTube and you haven't already, please make sure you go ahead, click that like, that subscribe, that notification bell. Make sure you're kept up to date whenever we drop new content on the channel. If you want the audio-only version of the podcast, open up your audio podcast platform, hit the search bar, type in The Format Podcast, and we should come right up. If you're enjoying the content, make sure you give us that like, that 5-star review, and drop a comment. All that stuff helps us rise in the algorithm, helps us find more sports fans, helps more sports fans find us. And finally, make sure you write it down, put it in your phone, set an alarm, do whatever you got to do to remember. Saturday nights at 7 p.m. we are live here on the Format Podcast, and we'll give you the opportunity to call in, talk to us, get at me. I love it. I can't wait. And with that, let's go ahead and get right to it. Let's check out this throwback episode. Remember, it'll look a little bit different because this is something I did 2 years ago. So you'll see a little bit of difference visually, but the content is still going to be amazing. So yeah, just go ahead, check that out, and enjoy. So obviously, Golden State Warriors just won their fourth championship in the last 8 years, and Steph Curry finally received his Finals MVP that he'd been lacking. One of the better players of all time. I think that's fair to say. But what kind of got me thinking about today's topic is, with him finally winning that Finals MVP, him getting the fourth championship,
first there was the argument, whose era has this been? Has this been the era of LeBron? And I've been saying from the beginning, it can't be LeBron's era when so many guys were eating on his watch. Guys were eating on his watch when he was early in the league. Guys were eating on his watch when he was in his prime in the league. Guys eating in his watch when he's on the downside, but still playing extremely well. So all throughout his career, guys have been eating. And for those of you who want to argue, oh, let's not act like nobody won during Michael Jordan's career. Yeah, when Michael Jordan was in his prime and he started winning, that was shut down, except for the 2 years or the 1 year minus 17, the 2 years minus 17 games that he was away playing baseball. Nobody else was winning. Would someone else have eventually won during that time period? Maybe, but there's no evidence to say that, being that Michael Jordan never lost in the finals. So anyway, this is not about Michael Jordan and LeBron. This is actually more about Steph Curry and the top 10. And why do I say that? Because with Steph Curry finally doing the things that he did last week, the questions have been now coming up, and there's been a lot of talk about it on all the sports media platforms and debate shows and everything. Now that Steph Curry has won his fourth championship and his finals MVP, is he a top 10 player of all time? Now, anyone who knows me and has known me for any period of time knows I've always loved shooters. Why do I love shooters? Because I'm 6 feet tall. And even in my absolute physical prime, I was never able to dunk. But one thing I realized, you could always, two things you could do. If you wanted to, you could rebound, because that's about boxing out and effort. And the other thing is, if you work hard enough, you can shoot. So I've always loved shooters, because anyone, no matter their level of athleticism, could become a shooter, right? So I always respected that. Just put in the effort and that can happen for you. Now, with that said, I love Steph Curry because he's an incredible, incredible player. Again, the greatest shooter we've ever seen. His ability to do it on the move, his ability to do it off the catch, his ability to do it off the dribble, and at such a high level of efficiency. And the way he's literally changed the way the game is played because of where he can shoot from. And he's changed that on all levels of basketball, from a Pee Wee to AAU, all the way up to high school and the pros, college and the pros. Right, the 3-point shot has never before in the history of basketball been such a potent, and I would say overused weapon. But again, that's not really the topic. So with Steph Curry doing everything he's done, and he's had a marvelous, incredible career that probably no one could have imagined when he entered the league. The question now becomes, is he a top 10 all-time player? So for me, I say no, right? I think Steph Curry is somewhere between 10 and 20. I've never actually sat down and mapped out my top 10 between 10 and 20. There's a lot of all-time great players in there. But my thing is this. Um, if you're going to be moving into the top 10 of all time, or if you as a sports pundit or what have you are moving players into your top 10 of all time, that's fine if you are ready and prepared to think about who you're moving out, right? So, people are saying, yeah, he's a top 10 player now, but very few of them are saying who they are replacing him with. Okay, or who they are replacing to put him in. Okay. So my thing is this. Hakeem Olajuwon, I think, is not I think. He is the most criminally underrated, almost to the level of disrespected, all-time great player who ever played. Hakeem Olajuwon, for me, is clearly a top 10 player. A lot of people have him top 10, but a lot of people have him like fringe top 10, 9, 10, or just outside the top 10. No, 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 no. My top 10, and I'm not going to run that down for you, but I have him at number 5 all time. And I know a lot of people are going to say that's high. I truly believe Hakeem Olajuwon is the greatest big man who ever played. Now, the statistics don't quite bear out that way. He only has 2 championships, right? He's a top 10 rebounder, not a top 5, the way, your Wilts, your Bill Russells, your Shaqs are. No one's going to say that he was the most dominant big man of all time. However, my argument for that is we have never seen a big man with the combination of skills, as in the total skill set, offensively, defensively, that Hakeem Olajuwon possessed. Not Kareem, not Wilt, not Shaq, not Russell, none of these guys, not David Robinson. David Robinson might be the closest in terms of most complete skill set, incomparably to Hakeem. But if you're going to bring up David Robinson, then of course you have to bring up the absolute demolition that we saw in the 95 playoffs when David Robinson was league MVP. And that was, I always point to it, that was truly the single greatest demolition we have seen of a player of David Robinson's caliber, and I would say he's a top 10 player of all time, not top 10, excuse me, top 20 player of all time. We've never seen a player of his caliber get demolished, not for one game, but for an entire series, the way Dream demolished him. And real quick, I'll run through the numbers on that. During that series, I believe it was the Western Conference semifinals in the 1995 season, en route to his second straight championship, Olajuwon averaged 35 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, 5 blocks in that series against David Robinson. And David Robinson was the primary defender. This wasn't like it is now where you're switching everything and guys don't handle their matchups. No, no, no. He completely eviscerated D-Rob for an entire 6-game series. And that was D-Rob at his absolute peak. So I think that's the guy. And no one's going to say D-Rob is probably, they're not going to say he's a top 10, top 5 center of all time. But in terms of total skill set, offensively and defensively, he's going to be the closest you have to Olajuwon. Okay. So what is it that I see about Hakeem Olajuwon? And I'll get into some of the numbers and some of the things that he did in a minute. But in terms of skill set, we know jumper, mid-range, deadly, low post, deadly, move after move after move, counter move after counter move after counter move. Tremendous footwork, tremendous skills on the low box. He could shoot his free throws for a big. I think he's like 73% from his career, which is really good for a center from the free throw line. This is a guy who had a jump shot all the way out to the top of the key and all the way almost out to 3. Now, back then, of course, bigs weren't shooting the long range jumper the way they do now, but it was there, right? If you were able to, if you were around to see that. And I saw that in real time. And of course, you know, you can go back and look at this stuff on YouTube or whatever, but I saw it in real time what Dream was doing. On the defensive end, Dream is, since they started recording block shots, he's the all-time leading shot blocker in NBA history. But the real key here, he was ahead of his time in terms of when you look at it now, defensively, you see bigs in the team concept need to be able to step out and guard the perimeter. Well, they weren't switching everything back then, but if they needed to, Dream was a guy who could do that for you in terms of being able to step out, guard the pick and roll, guard a guard, and still get back to defend the rim. That's how athletic he was. Now, as I mentioned, he's the all-time leader in block shots since block shots have been recorded in NBA history. If not, the all-time leader would probably be either Bill Russell or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But as the numbers stand, that's him. Hakeem Olajuwon, number 1 overall on that list. But what really gets me, not just his ability to step out and defend guards on the perimeter, but the fact that he is a center, the only center in the top 10 in steals. Think about that. He's top 10 all time in steals as a center. That should tell you something. That's the athleticism, that's the quickness, that's the understanding of the game. So not just sitting in the paint blocking shots, which of course we know he was incredible at, but the ability to get out, guard on the perimeter, and steal the basketball. So where does that lead us in terms of stats? At the time of retirement, Hakeem Olajuwon was the only player in NBA history to retire top 10 in 4 major statistical categories. So he was top 10 in points. He was top 10 in, I think he's number 11 or 12 in points now. Obviously, guys are moving up that list at an alarming rate. The rules are made for it to happen, so be it. But when he retired, he was top 10 in points. He was top 10 in rebounds. He's still top 10 in rebounds. He was obviously number 1 in blocks and top 10 in steals. I believe he's now number 10 in steals. So you look at this, you say no other player in the history of the game was able to retire with those type of numbers. That alone should start to give you an indication of just how great Hakeem Olajuwon was. But in the event that it doesn't, and I'm sure for many people it doesn't, now we look at the fact that he was clearly the best center in the best center era of all time. Now, he played in, he was drafted number 1 overall in 1984. Yeah, imagine that. He was drafted number 1 ahead of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was drafted number 3. But the prevailing wisdom back then was if you had a dominant big and you could take him number 1, you took him. Legendary Indiana coach Bobby Knight once said, draft Michael Jordan and play him at center, right? That's how great Mike was. But that's another story. Anyway, yeah, so Dream was drafted number 1 overall in the 1984 NBA draft, which now puts him into a league where he's going to be going up against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who by then was on the downside of his career. I think he was in year 16. He was still really, really good, but Dream had to play against him. He had to play against Moses Malone. He played with Ralph Sampson, but played against him in practice every day. He had to play against Mark Eaton, another top 10 shot blocker all time, who was in Utah at the time. 1985, Patrick Ewing comes into the league, number one overall. 1987, David Robinson comes into the league, number one overall. 1992, Shaquille O'Neal comes into the league, number one overall. Number two in 1992 with Alonzo Mourning, right? 1994, in comes Dikembe 1993, I believe, in comes Dikembe Mutombo. So he played in arguably the greatest big man era of all time. Great defensive centers, great offensive centers, and he had to go against them all, and he was the best of the bunch. So now we look at it and we say, okay, Bruce, you're giving me all the propaganda. You gave me some stats. Okay, he had great numbers. He played against great competition. Now I got a buddy, my best friend, says all the time. He says, Dream was great, but he's not what you say he was, or he would have had more championships. He would have come out of the West more often. Now, if we go back and look at the rosters that he played with, yeah, that's tough, right? So in 1986, 2 years into the league, he and Ralph Sampson with the Rockets upset the Lakers. Now, that was supposed to be a rematch of the 1985 NBA Finals, in which the Lakers finally beat the Celtics in the finals for the first time, which coincidentally was a rematch of the 1984 NBA Finals, which was the first time Magic Johnson and Larry Bird got to face each other in the finals, and that was awesome. But anyway, the Rockets upset that apple cart. Those 86 Lakers and the 86 Celtics were two of the best teams of all time. But the Rockets upset them in the Western Conference Finals, and they ended up playing the Celtics in that series, which the Celtics won 4-2. Now, going forward, who knows what Hakeem and the Rockets could have been, but Ralph Sampson's knee got blown up, and back then, obviously, medical science isn't what it is now, so he was never able to effectively recover from that. So now you put Olajuwon in a situation where he played for many years with lackluster, subpar teammates. He's putting up great numbers. He's dominating offensively, defensively, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, as we know so well from the modern NBA, he needed more help. I'm not going to say, whose line that is. But anyway, point I'm trying to make is he needed more help. So the argument that if he was as great as I say he is, he would have done more, that's tough, because also at the time, he's in the Western Conference, and Magic Johnson and the Lakers are dominating that conference because, well, Magic is Magic, and that team was loaded. But anyway, back to Dream. So Dream now is having a tremendous run, and finally he's able to get back to the finals in 1994. So 1994 is kind of what I want to talk about, and I'm going to digress for a second. One of the things we talk about with LeBron James are his incredible playoff performances. And he has phenomenal stat lines across the course of many of his playoff runs. The difference is LeBron James, after leaving Cleveland the first time, has been in positions where he's had loaded rosters, right? He's always had at least one or two more franchise players on rosters with him. So yes, while he's been putting up tremendous numbers, it's not like he was necessarily carrying bad teams. Some people are going to argue that, but go back and look at the rosters. They are what they are. I'm not going to get into that. Now, in 1994, Michael Jordan had stepped away from the NBA. He's playing basketball. In 1995, he's playing baseball. In 1995, he's also playing baseball, but close to the end of the year, I think with 17 games left in the regular season, he decides to come back. He needs to get back in shape. The Bulls need to get reacclimated to having him, and the Orlando Magic upset the Bulls to go on to the NBA Finals. But again, different story, talking about 1994. So in 1994, Hakeem Olajuwon has what I believe is the single greatest season in NBA history. And I think there's a legitimate argument for that. Again, I'm sure some people who didn't see it and don't understand what he did are going to argue that. They're going to say LeBron, they're going to say Jordan. Okay, that's cool. Let me break down Dream's bona fides from the 1994 season. So he simply wins the most valuable player award. He wins the defensive player of the year award, right? So he's got a DPOY, he's got an MVP, he's an all-star, He's first team All NBA, first team All Defense. Okay, so he's got basically everything you can have in a single season. All right, cool. Now goes on to the playoffs. And this is what amazes me. This, I truly believe, like I said, is the single greatest playoff run NBA history. Dream averages 29 points per game, 11 rebounds per game, 4.3 assists per game, 1.7 steals per game, and 4 blocks per game through this playoff run. What's special about this playoff run? Those numbers on their face are crazy, right? But now let's dig a little deeper, because numbers without context don't mean anything. Hakeem Olajuwon is the only player. Let me say this again, LeBron fans. The only player. Let me say it one more time. The only player. Okay, I'm gonna do my Dr. Umar Johnson now. He is the only player in NBA history to lead a team in all major statistical categories through an entire playoff run. Here's the rub, resulting in a championship. You see where I'm going there? Okay, Hakeem Olajuwon is the only player in NBA history to lead a team through an entire playoff run, resulting in a championship in every major statistical category. That's undeniable. That is a fact. No one else has been able to do that. That's crazy, right? So now, yeah, that's special. But then here's the other thing, and this is something else I'll also point to. Hakeem Olajuwon averaged 29 points per game, 28.9 to be more exact, through that playoff run. His next best scorer on that team was Vernon Maxwell at 13.8 points per game. Why am I bringing that number up? Because that 15 points per game gap is the highest ever in NBA history between the scoring leader and the second leading scorer on a playoff team that won a championship. I mean, what more needs to be said? Dream did everything. Yes, his role players stepped up, hit a lot of big shots. You have Big Shot Bob, Robert Horry. You have Mad Max, Vernon Maxwell in 94. Kenny the Jet Smith, Sam Cassell, who was a rookie but made a lot of big shots through that playoff run. Mario Elliott, another guy who made a lot of big shots through that playoff run, right? I say it to say, if you really go back and look, like, I'm not just throwing stats at you. You had to have seen what Hakeem Olajuwon was doing in this playoff run. And then who he beat. He beat Gary Payton and Sean Kemp, right? When they were with the Seattle Supersonics. He beat Charles Barkley with the Suns. And I believe he also beat Stockton and Malone, Utah Jazz. So he knocked a lot of Hall of Famers out of the way en route to that chip. And then in the finals, he matches up against Patrick Ewing, another top 10 center all time, another all-time great, a dream teamer, NBA 50 greatest and 75 greatest, a guy who coincidentally beat him for the national championship in the Final Four at college when Georgetown played against Houston. So I'm sitting here and I'm telling you, Hakeem Olajuwon, a lot of people don't even have this guy in their top 10 all time, which is ludicrous, disrespectful, blasphemous, ridiculous, whatever your other words you want to use. And then on top of that, they're going to say, well, I'm going to, even if he is, he's at the bottom of my top 10 and I'm going to move him out to put Steph Curry in. No, 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 no. As much as I love Steph Curry, that's terrible. That's shameful. And so I bring all this up to say Hakeem Olajuwon is criminally underrated, criminally disrespected. He does not get his due as an all-time great. Now, could that be because the era he played in? So there wasn't as much media coverage. Obviously, there wasn't social media. Could it be that? Could it be that he's not an American-born player? I've said this time and again, it truly doesn't matter how great a player is. If he's not an American-born player, there will be somewhat of a disconnect, and they're not quite going to get the love from the American fans and media that they should. Now, Luka is probably the guy that's coming closest to bridging that gap, but still, if there was an American-born player who played like Luka, he would get more love than Luka. It's just that. It's the American exceptionalism, it's patriotism, nothing wrong with that, but it just is a fact. It is what it is. Dream is without a doubt the greatest international player that the NBA has ever seen. There's no question about that. I'm sure some may try to argue and tell you it's Luka, or they may try to tell you it's Dirk. No, it's not the case, as great as those two guys are. But yeah, you have a lot of people saying that Dream may not be in their top 10. And if he is, he's at the bottom. And now he's got to get bumped out for Steph Curry. And that's utterly, completely disrespectful. And just basing it on what Dream has done in his career, the love that he doesn't get really bothers me, as you can tell. And quick note, this was more about his 1994 playoff run, which, as I said, is the single greatest season of all time in my estimation. But even beyond that, he capped it off by doing it again in 1995. Now, midway through 1995, his college teammate Clyde Drexler was traded from Portland to Houston, and they got together, and so he got a lot more help there. I want to say Drexler averaged about 25 points a game through the playoffs. But again, Dream led them in rebounding, scoring, blocks. I don't know about assists during that second year of the back-to-back. And then he went on, as I mentioned, completely demolished David Robinson in the playoffs, beat Charles Barkley, and then went on to take it to a young Shaq and Penny Hardaway with the Orlando Magic and sweep them in the finals. So back-to-back championships, back-to-back finals MVPs, just one of the greatest players of all time. He's a guy who absolutely should be in everyone's top 10. Like I said, I have him at number 5. That may be too high for some people. But the fact that he's not in a lot of top 10s and the fact that he's getting bumped out for Steph Curry, absolutely disrespectful and blasphemous. All right. Well, that's all I got on this topic. I know I got off on it, but I really had to tell you how I feel about Dream and how he's treated in terms of the historical perspective of the NBA. And unfortunately, that's only going to get worse as more and more guys put up these numbers as time goes on and we get further and further away from Olajuwon's prime and the great things that he did, and he starts sliding down the leaderboards instead of in terms of the counting numbers. But yeah, that's all I got on this topic today. Thanks for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, you know what you got to do. Click that subscribe button, like and subscribe. Appreciate you. Leave a comment if you can. Let me know what you think of the video. Let me know if you agree, disagree, what have you. You can always reach out on social media. It's at the bottom of the screen right there. Click that notification bell so that you can be notified when new videos come out. If you want the audio only version of the podcast, we're available pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. And if your audio podcast platform allows it, please give us that 5-star rating and leave a comment. It helps us rise in the algorithm. Okay. Thanks so much for checking in. We'll be back next time, and I'm out. Peace.